Hello there and welcome to the Code Control Community Ask Me Anything session. Here we talk with our community members about their freelancing experience and ask them anything about it. I'm Yuri and with Ella, we are community managers here for Code Control and 9 a.m. And today our guest is Sebastien Arbogast, a full stack developer and tech entrepreneur with over 15 years of experience in software development and methodology, Decentralization and Blockchain Evangelist, who also teach people about the blockchain, smart contracts, and decentralized application development, as he taught on LinkedIn, especially on Ethereum and Solidity, and also the host of the Proof of Cast, a French-speaking podcast that explains and demystifies cryptocurrencies, blockchains, decentralized platforms. And also Sebastien is a super experienced digital nomad. So, hello, Sebastien.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Yuri.
Welcome. And let's start from the beginning. Tell us more about your professional experience and how you started your freelancing journey.
Sure. So after graduating, in France from engineering school, I started working as an employee, as a consultant for a consulting firm in Belgium. And I worked there for like 5 years. And the main thing that convinced me to join was that they had a really interesting culture, very flat hierarchy. A lot of opportunities to train on like soft topics like psychology and stuff like that. So I really loved the experience there and just the company culture. And then in 2008, when the crisis hit and all the consultants started to come back to the bench in droves, the parent company of this agency, which was in France, said, you know what, you've been doing your own thing for a while and we let you do it until so far as your numbers were good, but now that numbers are meh, even though they were better than in the rest of the group, they just decided to bring back their own culture and do things their own way, which didn't really fit with my own perspective. And by then I had been with the company for 5 years, so I felt confident enough to go on my own, and that's when I decided to go freelance. And I had taken enough information from like colleagues and stuff who had convinced me that it was not so risky after all. So in 2010, basically, I started as a freelancer, working for a small company in the customs industry, and then after a year of that, I started to dive into more of startups and stuff like that. But that's how I got started with freelancing, basically.
Is there anything you would have done another way if you were starting your freelancing career right now?
One thing probably is that I would have created my company earlier, because the very first year I didn't know exactly how much I could expect in terms of revenue, and some people had advised me to start as what we call in Belgium a physical person, which is like you're a freelancer but you don't have a corporation, you just have a VAT number and you can invoice on that. And it's easy to set up, but it's limited in terms of taxes and stuff. It's really heavy. So basically, I had to redo the whole company creation, invoicing, and all that a year in to my freelancing stuff. And I should have done that from the beginning and it's just a lack of. I was confident enough to start as a freelancer, but not confident enough to know exactly how much revenue I could make. So it's more of an administration thing, I'd say.
At this point in your freelancing career, do you now know of places where you could access information to help you make those decisions that maybe you didn't at the time? Because it sounds like it's an information issue, right? Like you didn't know how much to expect, but also there wasn't kind of an easy resource for you to refer to be able to go, oh, actually, because I'm in this line of work and this is the industry that I'm in, this is what I should expect and this is why I should make this decision right now.
I think the landscape is definitely different now than it was 12, 13 years ago, especially in terms of accounting. I feel like in 2010, when I started, there was still a lot of old school accountants who were way more comfortable, like working with companies, with employees, with investors and stuff, and not so much with solo entrepreneurs or freelancers. And now it's that there are entire like fiduciary firms who are specialized in that and working specifically with freelancers and gig workers and all of that. So I think the freelancing model has become way more popular, and that has helped a lot with the information issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that really, it comes down to something that I think is going to be a recurring theme in our conversation, which is that you've been quite an early adopter of a lot of modalities, a lot of technologies in your career. And you know, there's not just the freelancing, but there's also the nomading, and there's also the Web3, which all of which we're going to kind of come to next. But I wonder if, while we're kind of talking about freelancing, we're talking about your somewhat prescient decision making compared to many other folks in the economy. You sort of have this like elder statesman, not implying that you're old at all, but just that you were really like early on in a lot of this stuff. What other changes, what other transitions, evolutions have you noticed in freelancing that maybe, you know, and I don't think we need to think about freelancing in a silo either, because I think that there's actually a lot of overlap with a lot of your other interest areas and other specialty areas. So I'm not trying to kind of like force you to talk about just freelancing, but like if we can sort of use freelancing as the kind of the starting point for this, like what other changes have you really noticed, like things that have jumped out at you over the past 15, 20 years of working in tech, maybe 10, 20, 15 years of freelancing, of nomading? What other things have kind of jumped out at you as like, oh, wow, these have been sheer shifts in state, shifts in mindset, things that have like massively transformed the landscape and completely changed the way that you would have approached what you're doing now if you hadn't already been there and been doing it? It's quite a complex question. Sorry. Like, I'm so curious.
Yeah. There's one thing that pops to mind definitely is that when I started freelancing, it was mostly like a shift in status and a shift in interaction and relationship with the companies I worked with. So I would usually have just one client at a time, or have some side hustles or like and startup ideas like I was working on the side. But my main job, my full-time job, was always with one company, and I would work there just like any other regular employee from 9 to 5, or like usual hours, I would say. And but the only difference is that instead of having a pay slip at the end of the month, I would just send my invoice and wait 30 days to be paid. That was the only big difference, I would say. And then all the consequences of that, like the ability to buy my own gear and to choose my own vacation and whatnot. But it took me a few years to realize that this would only get me in a certain kind of companies and in a certain kind of projects. So I worked a lot with banks. I worked with, with the customs administrations. I worked with, as a freelance, but for big companies and in big corporations who just needed some extra hands to work on their stuff. And usually that also means that you basically have to go through sometimes very predatory kind of intermediaries who don't bring a lot of value to the table, but they are just there, and they are they are kind of the gatekeepers, and you have to go through them to work with those companies. And very often it put me in positions where I didn't really enjoy my work and really didn't bring a lot of value. And it took me a while to realize that there was a whole segment of the market, of the IT market, that was really served by these companies and by extension by freelancers. And that was like smaller companies and startups who usually, well, first of all, don't want to have to pay the premium of going through an intermediary who takes like 25-30% on top of what the freelancer costs. Second of all, don't know where to find people. and also have very particular needs when it comes to projects. Like when you're talking to a startup or a small company, a startup, their main problem, their main concern is flexibility. They don't have a constant stream of investment or funding. Sometimes they have enough like money bank to actually invest heavily in development. Sometimes they have to take a step back and slow things down until they've stabilized their next round of funding. And so they need some people who can accommodate this kind of ups and downs. Of course, with FTEs, like with employees, it's really hard for them to do that. And if they have to go through contracts with intermediaries, there are all sorts of contractual conditions that make it very, very hard as well. So as freelancers, like as direct freelancers, we have the ability to accommodate these kinds of up and downs. And also it means that we can have several of those clients in parallel to kind of avoid having all your eggs in the same basket. And yeah, when one client winds down, then we can ramp up on another one, and we can kind of arrange our schedule that way. So that was definitely a big shift. And startups have similar issues for different small companies have similar issues with the different reasons. And the fact is that IT is simply generally not their main concern. Like for example, now for a few years, I've been working with this construction company. They don't have like IT is not their main concern. And so sometimes I work with them, and there's a project that's just on hold because we're waiting for information coming from the other side of the company. And until that happens, then I'm basically on hold. So while I'm on hold on that project, again, I can ramp up on another one. And again, that's flexibility that's very good for them as clients and very good for me as well, because again, I can just not put all my eggs in the same basket and have fun with several clients at the same time in different contexts with different technologies and stuff like that. And that's clearly something that I hadn't seen at the beginning. It took me probably, what triggered the shift for me is that I wanted to be a nomad. I wanted to work remotely, and I knew that if I worked remotely first of all, it was really hard to work remotely for banks or organizations like that. They're not adapted to that at all. They want to watch over you and like look over your shoulder all the time. So for them, it's a management issue. And so I knew that if I wanted to be able to work really remotely, the best way to do it would be to find clients who just didn't care where or when I worked, so long as I delivered and shipped what they wanted. And that's the flexibility I found. It's not the only way. I work with a lot of nomads who are still employees or contractors for one company at a time. But for me, it's just the most flexible and best way to do it.
So about nomading, how did you become a digital nomad? So you told that you've been thinking about it for so long, for a long period of time. And was there some exact moment when it was like, okay, right now I will be a digital nomad? So how did you become a nomad?
I would say it started to take roots in my head probably a year or two before I started actually doing it. Just because I discovered like a lot of digital nomads will tell you that their origin story is the 4-hour work week book. It's very popular among nomads. I never read it. I think I started reading it at some point, but I found it so boring. The idea of using niche websites to gather ads, whatnot. It seemed way too abstract and kind of superficial for what I wanted to do. So that was not my origin story. I think I read some blogs and stuff like that, and probably got interested in Nomad List, which is a very popular kind of community in the nomad world. And just starting from there. And when I also discovered Hacker Paradise back then, which I'll come back later because it's a very prominent way of traveling now for me. But it's a company that basically organizes trips around the world with a bunch of nomads in the same location. And yeah, it's my main way of travel. It's been my main way of traveling over the past 4 years. But back then, when I discovered that and I applied to them, I realized that, yeah, if I really want to do it, sure, I could find a job where they allow me to work remotely. But on the other hand, I'm always going to be stuck with the time zones. I'm always going to be on their kind of time frame. And that means that if I go to Asia, I'm going to have to work a lot later or earlier or whatever. And if I work in South America, for example, it's going to be the opposite. So I didn't want to have to deal with that. And so before I could do anything in nomading, I needed to adapt kind of my personal business model in a sense. And that's when I actually started to actively shift from a model where I worked for one client at a time, 9 to 5, kind of traditional job at the office, to finding clients that were okay with me working remotely. And then at the end of 2017, I lost like the last contract I had with one of those traditional companies kind of faded away because they were acquired, so they didn't need the team anymore. And at that time, I already had this construction company contract I mentioned, and I had a couple of other leads for other clients. So I decided, okay, now it's the time. And also that's when I launched the online course about blockchain stuff. And that started very well. So I was very excited and it looked like it could be an important part of my revenue. So we're like, okay, now I have everything I need to actually get started. And that was in January of 2018. And then the next step for me was to determine if everything I had read or seen on Instagram, on YouTube and whatnot was reliable. If it was the reality, or if it was just like a shiny version of it. And also like simply it looks very good as a lifestyle, but also I need to check that it was good for me as a lifestyle, given my personality, my interests and my priorities and stuff like that. And one of the things that I was kind of concerned about, well, there were several things, but probably the main thing is culturally speaking, even though, I mean, I'm not old, but I'm kind of old for a nomad. Like most of the people in that community looked like they were 20 somethings and I was already like 35. So I wanted to make sure that I could still like find what I needed in that world. And also the other thing is that I didn't want to start working and living like that as a way to run away from something. I knew that it was like if that was the case, my anything that I was running away from would just catch up on me at some point and bite me in the ass. So I wanted to start from a healthy standpoint and have a really clear view of where I was heading and what I was going after. And so I decided to start experiments. So in early 2018, I started doing some co-living first. I worked from a co-living space in Switzerland to see if like it was also a good opportunity to do some skiing in the Swiss Alps. So why not? And I met some cool people there. I got some really interesting insights, but I realized that co-living was not necessarily the best way for me. I've done some since, but it's not just, I was looking for more community in particular and for more diversity. Co-living spaces can be very small. Like this one was probably 8 people at a time. So I needed kind of, to see more people, to have more experiences and stuff. And so after that, I tried to travel on my own for a little bit. And same thing, even though I'm an introvert, and that's one of the things I also wanted to verify, like I'm an introvert, I need a lot of me time to recharge. On the other hand, I know that sometimes I crave community and I want to interact with other people, even if one-on-one, but just like have this kind of enriching relationship with my peers. And traveling on my own was kind of frustrating in that regard. And then in June of 2018, I joined my first Hacker Paradise trip. That was in Japan, in Osaka. And I went there with just a one-way ticket. I just didn't know where I would head. Like I was just, okay, I'm gonna follow that lead and see where it goes. But I kept my apartment in Belgium. I was living in Belgium at the time, and I still had my apartment in like the suburbs of Brussels. And I decided to keep it just in case I didn't like it and I need to come back. But then I went on this trip in Osaka. I really liked it, everything about it, the group. It was everything I had been looking for. And but then I didn't know if it was just this group in this particular context. You know how science experiments works. We need to reproduce them. We need to be able to replicate the experiment. So then I decided to follow them on their next trip. They were going to South Korea, to Seoul. And so since I only had a one-way ticket, I could just follow them there. And I loved it even more. So after 2 or 3 weeks in to the Seoul trip, I was like, now I need to make a decision because I cannot keep traveling like that and keep my apartment in Belgium with all the costs and expenses that goes with it. So there was a moment of panic because it was like clear in my mind that I wanted to do that full time. But on the other hand, I was like, yeah, but it seems too good to be true. There's got to be a catch. And that's where the community helped because my roommate at the time in Seoul had been doing that way before it was even cool. Like he started probably in 2005, 2006, something like that. So it was really early in the movement. And he told me, yeah, just do a spreadsheet with all your expenses in one column and all your revenues in the other one. And yeah, drag the formula at the end and see if it's worth it or not. And so I did that until that was September of 2018 until like the end of December. I tried to anticipate all my revenues and all my expenses and everything. And I compared the if I travel full time to the if I stay in Belgium full time. And in the end, it cost me more to stay in Belgium than to travel. When you add up all the insurance and the utilities and the internet and all of that, you realize that, I realized that for me, it was more interesting to travel than to stay in Belgium. So that was kind of the end of it, the end of the discussion. After that, I started to list everything I wanted to sell, like all the contents of my apartment, basically. And I went back to Belgium. I gave myself 6 weeks, basically, to get rid of everything, get rid of my apartment, sell my car, my motorcycle, everything. And because there was another trip that I wanted to join in Cape Town. And so, yeah, I had 6 weeks between Seoul and Cape Town to figure it out. And I thought it was really too short and I could never make it and it would be a nightmare, but whatever, I'm going to try. And turns out that I was so motivated that when I went back to Belgium and started selling everything and whatnot, after basically 3 weeks, I was sitting in the middle of my empty apartment, looking around and thinking, oh no, now I have to wait. So yeah, I was really motivated to do it and it turned out way easier than I thought. So yeah, after that, I got rid of my apartment and everything that I owned ended up fitting in one suitcase and a couple of backpacks, and that was it. And then I was on the road. I joined the Cape Town trip and basically never looked back. And that's how I started.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Yuri, does it make you, especially after you've just moved as well, right? Does it make you want to just sell your kid, sell your car?
Kid, dogs, everything. Yeah, that's exactly how it works.
So, Sebastien, one of the things that I just keep kind of coming back to with these stories that you're telling us is this concept of community. And, you talked about how important community was to your nomad experience. And obviously, Yuri and I know you from a freelancer community. But actually, one of the kind of things that you're prominent for in our freelancer community is also your Web3 knowledge and your Web3 connection. And a lot of the people that I know who are in the Web3 world also talk about the power of community there as well. And I just wonder whether you would like to unpack a little bit about why community is so important to you and the ways in which it has facilitated not just your nomad existence, but also your Web3 journey and your experience in that part of tech.
Yeah. I mean, community, the main reason that I enjoy traveling and one of the reasons that pushed me basically to being a nomad is that I feel like we're too much time thinking in terms of nationalities, where we come from, what it means, political borders and all of that. And I've always felt like national borders were an absurdity, was something that we made up. We just drew some lines on a map and said, voila, that's the way the world works. And for me, it has absolutely no sense whatsoever. And because of that, we end up being divided as a society, as a species even. And that's what creates a lot of issues. That's what makes it basically super hard, if not impossible, to tackle a lot of those issues. We're just pitted against each other in a lot of situations. And I've always been convinced that I have more in common with people of South Africa or South Korea or whatever than we have differentiating against. Sure, we don't have the same culture. Sure, we don't share a lot of the same history. We don't have the same language and stuff, but we're human beings. We care about people. We care about friends. We care about our families. We want to bring value into the world. There are so many things that we have in common. And that's what I'm always looking for in community. And one of the things I didn't really anticipate and I really discovered when I started traveling is the notion that I've come to call compounded discovery. It's just not just you discovering something new. It's you discovering something new surrounded by other people who are different as well. And like comparing perspectives and like it makes the whole discovery process even more interesting and even more rich. And that's definitely now what I'm craving for in traveling. I see a lot of nomads who don't give the same importance to community. Some of them actually give up because they feel lonely. It's true that nomadism can feel lonely if you're always traveling on your own. For me, the way I find balance is by doing that, is by traveling with groups and joining those communities to, again, to discover, to compound the discovery. That's the main thing I'm looking for. Now, as to the connection with Web3, it's kind of weird because I started working with Web3 from a completely different angle than the community aspect and the compounded discovery and the kind of global culture kind of thing, but they ended up converging and like intersecting in a way. The main starting point for me getting interested in Web3 was this idea that the way that our democracies work today is doomed to fail on the long run. It worked for a while. It was a very good replacement to what we had before. But now, if we really want to tackle more important challenges and also at a different scale, we also need to decentralize power in a lot of ways. And not just in financial ways, which is what cryptocurrencies do, but in political ways and in social ways as well. And that's why I got really interested in not so much in Bitcoin. Again, I probably bought a couple of Bitcoin at the very beginning just to see what it was. But what really got me hooked to it was Ethereum back in 2015. And I started following it in 2016, probably. I remember that I went to this conference. I think I was in the Silicon Valley working for a startup at this point. And I went to Stanford like panel conference and the speaker was I think it was Ben Horowitz from like Andreessen Horowitz, and he was talking about crypto, and some very proud American student in the audience like stood up during the question and answers time and was like, "Yeah, do you really think it makes sense to invest so much money in Coinbase and in all those crypto companies when obviously it's just a fad, right?" Like he was trying to give investment advice to Ben Horowitz. That was cute. And then Horowitz said basically something like, yeah, if you think that Coinbase and all those crypto companies are just about cryptocurrencies, you're in for a surprise, because you're completely missing the point. And then he started to detail some of the other use cases, and that's what really kind of tickled my fancy. And as soon as I heard that, I started to dig deeper into how Bitcoin worked and how Ethereum worked and smart contracts and all of that. And and from there I was hooked and I started working on it. So not necessarily from a community standpoint, but more like power decentralization perspective. And after probably a year of doing that, I realized that there was not a lot of resources for developers to really embrace not just cryptocurrencies, but smart contract and decentralized application development. And so with a friend of mine who also, like, I got into the movement, we decided to create an online course and to publish it on Udemy. So it took us about a year to write it and produce it and put it together. And then in 2017, basically at I think it was in September 2017, at the height of the last biggest bull run ever, when everybody was super interested in that, we just launched the course, and we started having a lot of feedback and create some form of community around it. I think now we have above 20,000 students on the course, but it grew very fast at the beginning for sure. And we started going to those Ethereum developer conference as well. The DEF CON, I think the first one we participated in was in was the one in Prague actually. In 2018, and we got a lot of interesting feedback from that. But over the years, I would say, with the bear market coming back, and also a lot of people realizing that Ethereum and the blockchain in general were still a little bit immature for a lot of the things that we wanted to do on them, and a lot of the infrastructure work still had to be done. The dApp development movement kind of, I wouldn't say die down, but at least kind of plateaued for a bit. And so we started just like maintaining the course, trying to update it as often as we could, even though it's not perfect. But yeah, and we spent less time in those communities. I still go to DEF CON every year, but for example, I went to the one this year in Bogota, Colombia, and I was not super excited by the shape that the community is taking and by some of the culture that's kind of growing in that space. So yeah, let's say I'm still interested in it. I'm still a big believer in its values and its perspectives, but I'm really worried because right now it feels like a lot of white dudes imposing their views on the space, not realizing that they're doing it, hiding behind this mythology of the 0x culture, which is basically, we're all anonymous, so who cares about your gender? No. I mean, let's not fuck around. When you go to a conference and you see a woman in tech, how do you react? There's no 0x whatsoever. You just bring your misogyny with you. So there's a lot of inequalities and imbalance in that space. So I'm kind of worried that we're about to reproduce this. Like if we don't fix that situation, we're gonna just end up reproducing the same conditions that led to the unequal system that we have now. And that's actually an even bigger motivation for us to work on that education aspect of things, because we want to bring more people in it and more diverse people in it. So the easier we make it, the more accessible we make it for all communities from all different backgrounds, and not just for white dudes, the better. So that's kind of the main motivation now to keep doing it.
Thank you so much, Sebastien, because I feel like, you know, so much of what you've just talked about also, from my perspective, like, you know, the fact that you're like, yeah, you know, you go to DevCon and it's full of these white dudes. I personally find that there is such a contradictory narrative, a contradictory story around a lot of Web3, where, you know, on the one hand, there's a conversation that is like, yeah, you know, we're gonna change the system, right? Where like the current system is broken for all of these reasons. There is like so much historical baggage that already exists, that so much of the society and the social structures and financial structures and political structures and distribution of power in our modern world is founded on so much historical inequality that rather than try and correct the course at this point, we just need to find an entirely new way of organizing that isn't founded on those principles. And yet, look, like it feels to me like, as you're saying, people bring themselves with them, right? They bring the preconceptions and the notions that of power and the notions of hierarchy that they have absorbed inherently, just, you know, just by living in the present society. So if it's not a conscious act of dismantling that inequality when you're building a new system, then it's just going to happen. It's nobody's kind of fault, and it's not something that people should consider is a failure on their part. But at the same time, if we really truly are collectively committed to creating new ways of interacting, creating new forms of finance, then we need to be mindful, we need to be conscious about what we bring to the table. So, you know, to kind of, I guess I could talk to you about this for hours. Like, I love talking about the like philosophy of crypto and Web3. And just, you know, I guess what I wanted to ask is, with this mindset, right? You know, like we're kind of, I think we're all on the same page here. What would you do differently if you could, obviously, you know, it's almost a little bit of a contradiction to say like, oh, if you had the ability to change everything in Web3, what would you do? But what would you do differently? You know, what if you could change one thing in the direction that things are going in right now? How would you stay the course?
There's one thing that I realized very late, is that at the very beginning, as we were designing the online course and writing the ebook also as well, we did a lot of public speaking as well, giving conferences, trying to introduce people to the topic and raise awareness basically about the potential it has, and way beyond just financial applications, but like, yeah, in more social and political applications as well. And we were not super intentional about where we did those interventions. We did them basically wherever we thought it would be welcome. And some of the most important or bigger impact places where we did that were developer conferences. It just turns out that the developer conferences are full again of the same kind of people. And so it's basically like amplifying. Not that the developers don't deserve to have this kind of access, but it kind of amplifies a trend that's already there. If it is hard for developers to have access to these kind of resources, imagine what it is for non-developers or non-traditional developers, or developers who don't even show up to those events because they don't feel safe there. And so I think what I would do differently is have more of a strategy when it comes to, okay, if we are going to give a big talk to, I don't know, 600 people in a developer conference room, what can we do also to kind of balance it out and also give access to the same resources and kind of introduce different people, different communities to this kind of perspectives as well. And that's something that you can easily do online, but just how you target your marketing and stuff like that. But it requires some intention and some agency. So for example, we published the first version of the course and all the versions since on Udemy. Udemy is a great platform, but it has some biases, just like everything else. And we are not in control of those biases, because all we do is we publish the course there, and then they take charge of all the marketing. And so who they sell to and who they push to the course is just like who wants to. There's no intention in that. It's just algorithms deciding, oh, that's what works. Developers want to know more about Web3. Let's push the Web3 course to developers. But then there's no intention behind that. And that's one of the reasons why the next version of the course, which we are working on right now, I think is going to be, one part is going to be on Udemy, just for generating leads. But the biggest part is going to be on our own platform, where we can do our own marketing and target communication about the course in a different way, and hopefully kind of rebalance a little bit the audience, and have more diverse people dive into it and give us feedback, and also tell us, like, because I mean, let's be realistic. Both my partner and I, we are white dudes. So of course our own vision is biased, and we carry the same kind of ingrained notions and perspectives as every other white dude. So we try to be intentional about being aware of them, but at the same time, we have kind of blind spots that we need to work on. So that's where having that kind of feedback also helps, and definitely, yeah, rebalance things a little bit.
I have some question about the current market job situation, but you told that some developers are not feeling safe in those kind of conferences. And it's fun, but we are planning to do a freelance unlocked conference in the nearest future. So what would you love to see? So what do you think has to be there to make people feel safe? And what would you like to avoid?
That's a big topic. I think one of the main things is that inclusivity has to be way more than just a marketing buzzword, or like yeah, we have a code of conduct. Good, check. No, your code of have to be able to enforce it. You have to create the space in a more active way than just by writing down, oh, this is not good. If you do that, you're a bad guy. No. It has to be more concrete and more pragmatic than that. And sometimes it's hard, because it's not just it's not a message that a lot of developers in particular are willing to hear. They feel threatened, feel attacked, they feel guilty sometimes, and whenever you remind them of the trends, the first message, the first kind of idea that pops to their mind is, that doesn't concern me. I'm not doing that. I'm a good guy. So it's for all the others to feel concerned. And they don't even realize that, again, privilege, that's the way it works. You benefit from it without even realizing it. And yeah, so there's some work to be done in terms of education and in terms of messaging to make that more pragmatic and more clear. I think the second aspect also is to have some form of positive discrimination in place to, yeah, put other kinds of developers to the forefront, people that everyone can identify to. And yeah, sometimes it means having a deliberate policy when it comes to, okay, how many women do we have in the speaker like roster? Who is speaking at our conference? And yes, sometimes it's harder to find women who are willing to speak, because one, there are less of them. Two, they are very picky about where they speak, and yeah, they have to feel safe too. So it requires more effort to find a women speaker, not because they are less competent or they are less skilled, but just because, yeah, they're harder to find because there are less of them, and they need to feel safe as well. So it requires more work to find less women willing to speak in those events. And I'm just speaking about women here, but it's about all minorities basically in that space. So I feel like this can definitely help. And also, when something bad happens, there's the problem is now is that social media has perverted and like corrupted so many of our interaction that it's absolute madness. In previous years, coming back to DEF CON, in previous years, I was kind of by the level of inclusivity and the fact that they were willing to involve pretty much everyone, every gender, every sexual orientation, everyone was welcome. At least it seemed that way. But on the other hand, you have this very aggressive and very toxic culture going on in crypto, Twitter and crypto socials in general, where as soon as something happens, you see like big social movements going on. Like, for example, in the last DEF CON, there was this story of the brown backpack guy. Basically, a guy was really super rude and obnoxious with a group of women who kind of fought back and just stood up for themselves. And after that, they were kind of annoyed that the code of conduct was not really enforced to their liking. And they decided to blast that guy on Twitter. And of course, after that, a bunch of guys started asking questions about, yeah, but what did he do? Like, they started questioning the voice of those who complained, of course, like it always happens. And a few days, and the women knew that it was pointless to try and respond and explain or whatever, because it would just create more piling on. So they just stopped there. Probably realized that blasting the guy like that in public was not the best idea ever, but whatever, it happened. And then the guy was really, there was a lot of outrage, and I think the guy was banned from the conference or something like that. And a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of rumors, a lot of mind reading going on. And after a few days, the guy himself wrote a long post explaining his view, his perspective on what had happened. And for some reason, nobody dared to question that. Everybody took it at face value and decided, yeah, that's the truth. That's what actually happened. And so the women made it up. The women exaggerated everything. The women are crazy. And that was it. That was the end of it. And it's just the same scenario playing over and over again. And those guys don't even realize that they are playing the same scenario over and over again. And to this day, if you look up like the brown backpack guy, it's like the biggest scandal ever. It was censored, it was banned for no reason. And nobody even thought of putting themselves in the shoes of those women, what they went through and how they maybe experienced the thing, and try and balance things out a little bit more. And I tried to do it on Twitter, and I got like smashed in the head with like memes and whatnot. So, and I'm not complaining about that. I'm clearly not the best person to complain about that, but it just goes to show the difficulty that there is. Like, even if you try to have the right policies in place, the right messaging in place, the right people participating in your conference, there's a lot of things happening around it that can deviate the message very fast. So I would say, yeah, think about that. Not just about the conference itself, but all the social media channels and platforms and things like that around it, and how it can affect the atmosphere and the perspective, the interactions on the event itself.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your view and for opening this. It's really a very deep theme, and yeah, exactly, we can talk like forever about it. But it's not only about speaking, but just by taking action. So yeah, once again, thank you very much for sharing that. And let's open another big theme because nowadays there is some instability in the tech world. So what do you think about the current tech jobs market situation?
That's definitely a complicated one. I think there's been a lot of movements, even in terms of management culture and in terms of modality because of COVID. We saw a first wave in the nomad space. We saw a first wave of people coming after COVID who just started to work remotely because of COVID, and those people didn't care as much about community. They were mostly excited to be able to finally work remotely on the road, doing whatever, developing with a glass of pina colada on the side and stuff like that. But so it was a very different culture for sure. And then there was after that when big companies started calling back those people to the office. There was another wave of people who worked for companies who really went into remote work by conviction and not just by reaction, and who cared a little more about community. So there's a lot of shifts going on in a very short amount of time. Add to that the whole trend around asynchronous work, not just remote work, because we've come to realize that remote work is nice and all, but first of all, it's not really remote work if you have to show up at the office at least once a week. Let's be honest. Second of all, remote work is not just work that you do remotely, because if you do all the same things, if you go in as many meetings, and if you need to work from 9 to 5, just like your colleagues in the office, it's basically pointless. You're not taking advantage of the benefits of remote work. So now there are some companies, the companies who were at the forefront of remote work now have switched to async work. Like, how do we make sure that we can work without talking and meet and having all those endless meetings that are very costly and very ineffective? What tools do we need? What culture do we need to put in place? How it affects recruitment? How it affects education as well? All of those things are also important, and they are just starting to realize it now. And there are like job boards that are starting to pop up specifically for async jobs. So yeah, I think the biggest trend to come is asynchronous work, and also embracing both the advantages and the limitations of remote work, because it's true that developing and growing a company culture is harder when your colleagues are all over the place in different time zones and working asynchronously. So do we need as much culture? If we do, what kind of culture can we put in place? What kind of events, what kind of techniques can we use to kind of create trust between employees where it's necessary? But also, how can we embrace the fact that, yeah, they're just freelancers working on their own, and their work is not the main provider of community anymore. They find community in different ways. So how can we embed ourselves in that? How can we just favor that and give that community aspect to people without providing it ourselves? There's a lot of questions to be asked, but yeah, it's definitely an exciting time to be alive.
And you make it sound super exciting. I really love how, we live in this changing world, and not only are you so aware of that and like really like plugged in and tuned into it in a way that you allow yourself to also challenge your own assumptions and to be challenged by the world outside of you, and to keep on learning and growing. But you don't face that with fear. You have such an openness towards, being taught about difference in the world, being taught about the ways in which you can adapt and you can change your mindset. And I think that is one of the things that's really come through in this conversation with you, Sebastien, is just you're so incredibly open and hopeful and optimistic about people and about our potential to really transform this world and make it a better place for everybody. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I think that we need that injection of optimism in our lives, and we need more people, more people to lead with hope, because it's so easy to become overwhelmed. It's so easy to retreat into yourself when the world seems like such a complex and rapidly changing place. So yeah, I really want to thank you for that. I'm very grateful for you. Now, this might seem like a little bit of a contradiction, right? Because I think, like me, you tend to maybe shy away from these kind of like binary oppositions and choosing one or the other. But I'm going to give you a rapid fire round where I'm going to ask you to choose one of two options as quickly as you can without thinking too hard about it. And it's just for fun. Don't worry, we won't be like using this as some kind of social data or anything. Just you can interpret these words however you want to, and you can apply them to whatever things come to mind. But I'm just going to ask you to choose one of the following binaries, okay? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So, sweet or salty?
Sweet.
Hot or cold?
Hot.
Peace or quiet?
Peace or quiet? I would say peace.
Chicken or egg?
Chicken.
Beach or mountains?
Beach.
Rain or shine?
Shine.
Food or music?
That's a tough one. Music.
Night or day?
Night.
Amazing. You know what? That has been the most delightful rapid fire round that we've done so far, because clearly choosing between every single pair was so hard for you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. Like I feel like
just the last one, like
representative.
it depends if it's to work or
Yeah. For somebody who really is so open to all the possibilities, it's hard, right? Thank you so much again for sharing your thoughts, your story, your reflections with us. Are there any last words that you would like to share with anybody who has been watching this interview all the way through to the end? Anything you'd like us to include in the blog post? Maybe any messages?
I mean, what you said about openness and about hope and positivity, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not saying it's easy. It's really scary at times. It's just really is. And sometimes I just stay in a place for long enough and just kind of regroup a little bit and yeah, it's not easy to be that way. But it's one of the reasons I wanted to do that, to travel like I do and to work nomad and stuff like that, is that I really think that we cannot afford to be rigid anymore. It's not, the world is changing whether we want it or not. And so our best strategy as human beings is just to embrace it and to be more adaptable, be more flexible. And the best way to do that is to practice it. So however scary it is, if that's something that you want to do, if it's a tough skill that you want to learn and develop, I highly recommend it. And yeah, definitely challenging yourself with different backgrounds, with different people and different mindsets is the best way to do it.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. You know, like when I first met you in the community, I was like, oh, it's a really interesting person. We just must talk more. We must have this conversation. So thank you very much for gifting the most precious resource you have. It's your time, and for being open to share all your experience with us and with everyone who will listen. So once again, it was an amazing conversation. I would love to continue it, and who knows, maybe one day we'll do another round. So once again, thank you very much, and see you in the community.